Hello, my name is Ashley Davis, and this is my presentation on censoring literature, impacting learning inside and out of the classroom. So, censorship is basically taking away literary text, artistic images, films, themes, topics that are deemed as inappropriate for students of a certain age group or students of a certain culture, ethnicity, religious group. So here's the definition. Censorship is the removal, suppression, or restricted circulation of literary, artistic, or educational materials on the grounds that these are morally or otherwise objectionable in the light of standards applied by the censor. So, censorship has been something that's been around for a really, really long time. In China, the first censorship law was actually introduced in 300 AD. So it's definitely something that's been a part of our history. Um, Probably one of the most famous ancient censorship cases was that of Socrates. He was actually sentenced to drink poison for his corruption of the youth and his acknowledgement of unorthodox divinities. And I'm sure that he was not the first person to be severely punished for violating the moral and political code of his time, and he definitely wasn't the last. Um, Censorship has definitely took place over time in history, and in fact, one of the more well-known 20th century cases of mass censorship was in Nazi Germany. And it was the mass book burnings and persecutions of people with ideas that did not agree with the Nazi philosophy. And that's a big part of censorship is ideas, beliefs, not agreeing with another group's or individuals' ideas, culture, religious beliefs, race. All that is really tied into censorship's history. But the university students actually burned about 25,000 copies of literature deemed un-German, and those books were written by Jewish and communists and socialists, such as Ernest Hemingway, Jack London, Helen Keller, Sigmund Freud, Upton Sinclair. Um, they all of their books were burned in those mass burnings, simply because they were the Jewish descent. So, and then let's move on and let's talk about the Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. It's a pretty famous novel. That we're all familiar with. And in 1884, it caused quite a stir. It was tossed out of collection of numerous libraries actually in the late 1800s and early 1900s due to the idea that it, again, set an example for youth, a bad example for youth who may read it. And in fact, it's actually still a frequent target of challenges and bans today in schools and libraries. Um, and then many historians believe that the Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin is the first book in the United States to experience a ban on the national scale. In fact, the Confederacy barred the book from stores not only for its pro-abolitionist agenda, but also because it aroused heated debates about slavery. So, at that time period, they were actually trying to keep the debates about slavery out of the educational system. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then about 10 years after the Civil War, anatomy textbooks, doctors' pamphlets, about reproduction, anything by Oscar Wilde, and even the Canterbury Tales were deemed too sexy to even send through the mail. But however, by the 1920s, it was actually a shift in politics and It led to more booksellers to see themselves as advocates for people's rights to read whatever they wanted. So, about 1933, it was an influential court case, the United States versus one book. It helped usher in a new era of legal interpretation of the First Amendment. Um, and so, there was a simultaneous drop after that for book bans, and there was actually a rise in more explicit art because artists and authors they felt freer than ever to experiment. Um, and so they were writing stuff that wasn't the typical young adult literature, which had once been about a Friday night dates or going to the prom or getting a car or playing sports. It suddenly became more about reality. And for some reason, parents and other individuals really just had a problem with that. And so when President Reagan was elected, the changes again started taking place in America, and people were encouraged by his election to um, start challenging books because they were unhappy with the books that were being taught in the schools and libraries because of their increasingly realistic depiction of life. And in fact, schools and libraries were experiencing 700 to 800 book challenges a year. So once young adult literature really became more about realistic things in life, that's really when challenges and censoring really took off, and that's kind of where the problem arises. In other countries, politics actually join religion in center stage for censorship, with criticism of the government censored as well. Instead of the government, however, our censorship often comes in the form of concerned parents who do not want their children exposed to a worldview other than their own. Challenges are most frequently brought on by parents, followed by patrons, and then boards or administrations, then librarians and teachers, and then political and religious groups, as well as the government, have the small percentage that takes part in book challenges. Books are most often challenged at public libraries, nearly half the time, and then schools and libraries, as well as special libraries, are challenged a lot as well. Parents and patrons are very much involved with what students read in school because they are among the highest percentage for challenging books in schools and libraries. And some parents feel they have the absolute right to decide what material their children are exposed to and when their children are exposed to that material. It is also believed that students should not be exposed to sex, violence, drug use, or other inappropriate topics in school or public libraries. Um, and finally, the belief that keeping books with inappropriate content out of libraries protects kids and keeps them pure. So, deciding when it is appropriate to introduce certain topics or themes to students is very important, and parents should and do have the right to protect the purity of their child, however, not the right of everyone else's child. So, however, with the ever fast-paced, ever-changing world we live in, I feel it's extremely important to allow students to explore and enjoy age-appropriate young adult literature. Parents have many varying reasons as to why they deem something inappropriate for a child, and often objections arise from parents or other members of the community who take certain parts out of context from the whole instead of actually analyzing the whole text. So if parents would analyze the whole text and look at the literary components as they connect and relate, they may better understand the learning targets that the teacher is trying to achieve by using this specific piece of literature or topic. The overlooking details and taking parts out of context actually causes literary and educational value to completely be ignored. And religious grounds have long been cited as a reason for censoring books. Parents, ministers, and religious figures often object to works that discuss sex, evolution, magic, witchcraft, or occult themes. However, religious figures as well as political influences are among a very low percentage of these groups who challenge books to be censored in schools and libraries. Parent and patrons' top 4 reasons for challenging books are profanity, sex, sexuality, violence, and race. Um, Profanity is often used in literature to convey social or historical context, local dialect, or simply to better depict reactions to real life situations. So, profanity is used in everyday life, and a lot of adolescents use it themselves. Books such as The Diary of a Young Girl, Heather Has Two Mommies, It's Perfectly Normal, they've all been challenged by parents and school boards who deem their either their sexual passage too inappropriate for adolescents or because their frank discussion about sexual health and LGBT issues. But every day teenagers face these sexual health issues, and LBGT is a part of society, and it's important for students to understand that aspect. um, so when books are challenged for violence, it's often based on the idea that these works trivialize violence, um, and basically these books cause violence to go on to the readers, and it affects the readers and makes them commit violent acts. Um, Also, books containing racial epithets or historical truths regarding their usage regularly come under challenge. Um, and I find that kind of overwhelming because I think that historical truths should definitely be something that students learn about and know about, so we can make sure we prevent things that happen in history from repeating themselves, like the Holocaust and stuff like that. So I think that it's important not to censor those books, and to allow students to read them. Okay, so out of the 3,869 challenges that are reported to the Office for Intellectual Freedom each year, um, the the research should actually suggest that for each challenge reported, there are as many as 4 to 5 that actually go unreported. So, getting censoring out there and books being challenged out there is very important. So, everyone's aware of all the negative effects that come from censoring in schools and libraries. Um, so I'm going to name some examples of books that have been challenged and censored in schools and libraries. Some of those are, and again, there is tons and tons of books, because once you censor one book, it opens up a whole doorway to censor any and every book. So some of those are Harry Potter, Fallen Angels, The Color Purple, Catcher in the Rye, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Giver, Well Talk, Fat Kids Rule the World, Junie B. Jones series, Rainbow Boys, Fahrenheit 451, Draw Me a Star, Grendel, Goosebumps series, Tiger Eyes, Freaky Friday, and Heather Has Two Mommies. And again, these books are young adult literature. They're about teenagers, adolescents, very age appropriate, very realistic. Some of them have magical elements, or different elements like that, but they're still very relatable to the students. Um, and to take out novels from classrooms and libraries that capture students' interest is really depriving them of their learning, because that's taking away a motivational factor from the students. If you're not allowing them to have interest in the classroom and interest in what they're reading, then they're not going to be interested in learning or interested in school at all, period. I truly believe that allowing one book to be censored gives way to any and every book to be challenged and possibly censored. Throughout censorship history, there are so many cases that involve the removal of one or two books or forms of teaching to appease one group of parents, only to have another set of censorship opportunities requested by another group. So it really causes a snowball effect. Which is a very common danger of censorship in schools. Therefore, unless we want all schools and libraries to be bland and bare, we really have to take into account even allowing censoring. After all, the First Amendment does allow students to read what they want. Um, there's really so many negative, unbeneficial effects that occur both inside and outside the classroom when censoring occurs. The problem lies while trying to attempt to keep children pure for as long as possible because it's admirable, but it takes the form of leaving gaps in their education, if not academically, then about life in general. By censoring students because of parental preferences on materials, parents are constricting growth and maturity of adolescents. And some parents also prefer for their child to read fiction that has a happy ending, teach a moral lesson, or provide a noble role model. If these and other preferences were legitimate criteria for censoring materials used in the school, the curriculum would narrow, including only the least controversial and probably least relevant material. It would hardly address, and it would really hardly address the students' real concerns. It wouldn't satisfy their curiosity, um, capture their interest, and it definitely would not prepare them for life. Censorship in schools can lead to a narrow worldview with holes in cultural and international education in our children. If a child does not know from literary examples that African Americans were ever abused in society, then how will those same children understand the implication of the marches or rallies for black rights in modern society, or the struggles that people of color still go through to be treated as equals in all ways? Additionally, our children, if restricted to an education that supports their family's religion, will have absolutely no frame of reference to understand other religions, other cultures, or other beliefs. Censoring in school is something I feel hinders students simply because students are able to better relate to and understand certain edgy topics. Um, young adult literature is very, very relatable to adolescents, but it's very, very much challenged and censored in school. We're not only depriving students of the knowledge and power they deserve when we allow censorship in schools, but we are also we're going to cause even more students to become less interested in school and learning by creating the blandest lessons and activities. Um, and students' worldviews and understandings are not the only thing that hinders when censoring in schools occurs. In fact, teachers and their teaching strategies are also affected. Censorship affects teachers by enticing them to censor materials because they are afraid the parents' reactions. Therefore, censorship can be an invisible act and very, very difficult to trace or quantify. And by being so cautious about certain topics or themes, teachers are not willing to explore students' interests to find certain ways to teach or teach themes or topics to use. This can cause a negative impact on the student-teacher learning relationship because because teachers need to be able to relate to students' interests to ensure the student that they care. Also, by limiting resources and flexibility, censorship hampers teachers' ability to work all possible avenues to motivate and reach students. So by curtailing discussion ideas in class, censorship takes creativity, vitality out of the art of teaching, and instruction is reduced to, like I said, bland, formulaic, pre-approved exercises that's carried out in an environment that discourages the give and the take that can spark a student's enthusiasm for learning. So to maintain the spontaneous give and take of the classroom setting, teachers need latitude that to respond to unanticipated questions and discussion, and the freedom to draw on their professional judgment and expertise without fear of consequence if someone objects, disagrees, and takes offense. Um, Teachers should really be able to teach what they want to teach in their classroom. As long as it's academically appropriate. Uh, and I don't think that parents should be able to censor every child. I mean, if you put your child to bed at 8 o'clock, are you going to make me put my child to bed at 8 o'clock too? Like, it affects everyone when books are challenged and censored in the classroom. I believe that when we censor great young adult literature, we are restricting our young adults of knowledge and power, the intellectual freedom that they deserve. And intellectual freedom is the right of every individual to both seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. It provides for free access to all expressions of ideas through which any and all sides of a question, cause, or movement may be explored. Intellectual freedom encompasses the freedom to hold, receive, and disseminate ideas. Our schools and libraries being forced to restrict young adult literature to youth is, in fact, denying their intellectual freedom. So there are some really, really good resources that help fight challenge books and are really good for teachers and other school officials, librarians, parents, whoever who just wants more information about this. And they're the National Coalition Against Censorship, the National Council of Teachers of English, which is the NCTE, the American Library Association Office for Freedom, for Intellectual Freedom, and the American Booksellers for Free Expression. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the NCTE and the International Reading Association. They know that there is an important distinction between selection based on professional guidelines and censorship. So basically, whereas the goal of censorship is to remove, eliminate, or bar particular methods and materials, the goal of professional guidelines is to provide criteria for selection of materials and methods. So an example of this would be teaching evolution in the 4th grade opposed to 2nd grade because of students' lack of sufficient background to understand it and process the information. The choice to include material in the curriculum should demonstrate a pedagogical judgment, not an act of censorship. Therefore, if professional educators can articulate a legitimate pedagogical rationale to maintain such material in the curriculum, it is unlikely that an effort to remove it would be successful. And also through the NCTE's Intellectual Freedom Centers, advice is offered as well as helpful documents and other support to teachers in schools who are faced with text or teaching methods used in classroom and schools that are facing challenges. So I would definitely suggest taking a look at that. And some things that schools and school boards can do to avoid controversy should be they should definitely have clearly stated policies showing how materials are selected. And these selection policies should weigh the viewpoints of various groups within the community and be implemented by professionals. Those developing selection policies must consider community and parental concerns and demonstrate acceptance of our national diversity. I think that's all very, very important. So I want to talk about some strategies that are used to help develop a community understanding and prevent cries for censorship. And these strategies include parents. And what these strategies are doing are asking parents to contribute to developing school reading programs, giving a recommended reading list, having files of professional reviews that that support materials, as well as negotiating clauses that protect academic freedom and call for the agreed on selection process, and discouraging the concept that only one text can be used to teach a specific theme. So just getting parents more involved, more hands-on, allowing them to express opinions, be a part of stuff, so we can all collaborate and come to an understanding and agreement for the benefit of the students. So that's just really extremely important to make sure that you do when you're trying to avoid censorship within the community. And then some things that teachers and educators should be familiar with to help them would be the school policies and procedures for dealing with the book challenges, and they should be 100% ready and prepared to follow those procedures. There are 3 main points to focus on when responding to a book challenge. And these points are school curricula reflects a spectrum of social and political views and experiences. Social curricula also chosen by professional educators familiar with students' educational needs and abilities. And finally, in many cases, parents' concerns can be addressed by requesting an alternative assignment. And so teachers really they have a lot of responsibility in their classroom, and censorship is particularly harmful in schools because it prevents youngsters with acquiring minds from exploring the world, seeking the truth and reason, stretching their intellectual capacities, and becoming critical thinkers. When the classroom environment is chilled, honest exchange of views is replaced by guarded discourse, and teachers lose the ability to teach and guide their students effectively. So just teachers need to be able and be allowed to guide their students effectively and not have to worry about censorship within their classroom. And teachers should also introduce students to censorship and its issues and find ways to invite them to read a challenge book and decide for themselves what should be done with the book at their school. And there are plenty of resources through NCTE to explore ways to discuss censorship with students, and using Scholastic is also a good is something also really great to use because Scholastic is responsible for publishing some of the most frequently banned books and are widely criticized, but they have yet to back down in face of the criticisms. Aside from the criticism by various groups and individuals, the selection of books made have helped millions of young people discover the joy and power of reading and engage in important conversations about their controversial content. In addition, Scholastic believes that to publish important stories, both good and bad, which provide the appropriate context for children to learn and understand their world and themselves. So this is a critical role that great books can and must play in the lives of children, and teachers need to be the advocates for that. So it's just really, really important. And then going back to giving alternative assignments, that's also including like a rationale would definitely be included with the alternative assignment. And alternative assignments, in the next slide, I've put together an example of a reader response kit that you could use if you were to give options within your classroom. And so the next slide goes into more detail about that.
Okay, so this is just a really quick example of a reader response kit. At the beginning, they're going to include a rationale. And rationales are really important to use with any theme or topic or novel that a teacher is going to teach, because a teacher will have this prepared before even introducing the topic. That way, if parents or anyone does have a concern about the topic, the teacher can pull this out and refer to the rationale as to explain and justify why they want to teach a certain topic, theme, or novel, because it lists the different themes. It lists, it talks about the learning targets, the Common Core standards, why it's beneficial for the child educationally as well as outside the classroom. So it's really important to have this beforehand. That way, any questions or concern comes about, boom, you have this already prepared you don't have to worry about anything. And then by adding the reader response kit, it just gives options. So that way, if there is a concern about a certain novel, the student doesn't have to read that novel. They can choose to read a different novel. So that's just really good to have. And then it also includes, the kit also includes a Dear Student letter, which talks about what the story is about, the different themes learned about, and also talks about the different activities. So parents and students can also look at that and review the different activities that's already prepared ahead of time, so that they know exactly what the student's going to be learning, how it's beneficial to them, and there's no question about it. And so having this is very, very, very helpful, especially against censoring and being cautious with that.
I cannot express how important it is to spread the word when a book is challenged. Therefore, notifying parents, students, colleagues, other interested parties, local media outlets, editors of local newspapers, the author, publisher, and writing letters to discuss that challenge is extremely important for a challenged book and to keep it from getting censored. So I've included on my website a blog, for any and everyone to go on. Let's talk about censorship. What books do you know of that's been challenged or being censored right now? Have you witnessed a challenge happening? Have you yourself wanted to challenge a book? Look, let's talk about this. It's just extremely important to spread this message, get this out there, so we can do what's best for the students and the students' educational learning. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I hope you agree that we should allow schools and teachers to teach children how to think, not what to think.